Hey guys, Jason Sensational here, and today I have a really cool deck to showcase to you guys. I think it's an off-meta deck that is incredibly well positioned in this week's meta, especially with the popularity of two decks being Go Hard and Zoe Lee Sin. For those of you who remember this deck, it's not a new deck by any means, but I think that this deck currently has a really good matchup against two of the highest win rate decks and highest play rate decks on ladder today. So if you're interested in seeing more guides on some off-meta decks to really counter today's boring meta, please do give a like and a subscribe, and let's just jump right in. So, for those of you who remember what Miss Fortune Sejuani was like way back when before Targan's release, during the Rising Tides expansion, it was probably one of the most powerful and probably infuriating decks to play against. But you'll see that the core of the package itself hasn't really changed. You see a lot of the same cards that it used to run in the previous set. Most notable changes here is the change to Yordle Grifter now being an Allegiance card, meaning that we have to cut out some of the other Freljord cards in favor of hitting the Allegiance more often. So the only other Freljord card besides our 3 copies of Sejuani is a 2 copies of Troll Chant. I do think that Yordle Grifter is a little too strong to be cut because it gives us a warning shot, which is so important in triggering Sejuani's level up condition that I don't really think it can be cut, but I haven't really experienced or experimented with that yet. My apologies. Now, the deck itself is a very strong mid-range deck aiming to work towards Sejuani's level up while also getting chip damage in through the likes of Misfortune and Crackshot Corsair, while also having the NAB package to provide a little bit more value later on. You'll notice that I do have a one of Twisted Fate inclusion into this deck. I think that Twisted Fate just acts as a really unique and flexible champion slot that can not only be used as a 1 damage ping to the whole board, being able to crucially stun an opponent minion on an off turn, or even working towards its level up, which is actually possible in some matchups in this current meta. And so while playing this deck, you really have two main win conditions you're working for, but the first one being the most dominant and prevalent. This deck is very structured to be a very strong mid-range deck with a really good early curve with the likes of Jagged Butcher into Hired Gun into Petty Officer. And then on the late game, we have Sejuani to provide us that really strong overwhelm unit with the ability to board freeze our opponent, and also Riptide Rex to kind of close out the game if it drags on too long. We also have really strong tools such as Hired Gun and Razor Scale Hunter to grant our opponents vulnerability, and this allows us to gain very favorable trades or hook them into Misfortune's ability to get uh, free trades off of enemy minions. With the addition of the Troll Chant card, which this deck lacked when it was prevalent, it has increased our survivability of our units to really gain favorable trades in the early and mid game. Now, of course, we are also running a NAB package on the side with Black Market Merchant, Yordle Grifter, and Pilfered Goods. These cards allow us to gain card advantage over our opponent and just outvalue them if the game drags on too long. Because we're able to take cards from our opponent's deck, we're likely to not run out of steam too early on. With the addition of Zap's Sprayfin, we're able to tutor Pilfered Goods or Trollchant to have that ability to either keep our units alive or to slowly outvalue our opponents. And a one of Citrus Courier really takes this deck over the top, giving us that ability to rally on a turn that the opponent might not suspect, or just to heal our board to gain more favorable trades later on. And before I jump too much into the nitty gritty, in order to understand why MF Sejuani is good as an off meta deck, especially at this current moment, it's very important to understand the meta first. So, The meta right now is being dominated by play rate and somewhat win rate by these two decks, being Go Hard and Zoe Lee Sin. Zoe Lee Sin acts as a counter against Go Hard because they're able to play cards like Notify and Deny, whereas Twisted Fate, or sorry, Go Hard, is just a really strong and consistent powerhouse that performs really well against a lot of wide board aggro-centric decks. And on the other hand, these wideboard aggro-centric decks do have good matchups against Zoe Lee Sin. So sort of a very rock, paper, scissors meta currently. And the reason why MF Sejuani is so well positioned is because they're able to break this cycle. Not only do they have the tools to uh, go toe to toe with Go Hard, but I think that they actually have favorable matchups against Zoe Lee Sin. And I'll go into each individual matchups right now. So, starting with the Go Hard matchup, Go Hard's game plan revolves around them developing wide on board, pressuring your health early on, and then closing the game with a pack your bags, maybe combined with a Ledros, or just having a wide board state to open attack after they wipe your board. And the reason why MF Sejuani is good against Go Hard, maybe it's not great, but I'd put the matchup between a 55-45 or 50-50, so very close to even or slightly more favored in this matchup, is because we have a really strong early curve to contest. If we don't allow them to get chip damage early on, and we can develop good mid-range pressure and gain favorable trades with tools like MF and Troll Chant, we're able to slowly eke out on tempo, apply pressure to them. And the really key thing here is our NAB package is actually able to steal copies of pack your bags from the opponent's deck. So when they play their third Go Hard, you can play Pilfered Goods, Black Market Merchant, or Yordle Grifter to steal copies of pack your bags and just blow up your opponent from there. Especially if you can land even one or two pack your bags, you're often going to be the victor in this matchup. Now, the next matchup is Zoe Lee Sin, or really any variant of Zoe decks on ladder. This could be Zoe Karma, or for a lesser part, Zoe Victor, but mainly Zoe Lee and Zoe Karma. What Zoe Lee really does is that they have their turn one Zoe and maybe other elusives that they're playing around with, like Sparkle Flies, that really kind of chip in early on to generate value in order to stall the game out so that when they play Lee Sin and do their combo, they're likely able to win from this matchup. But I think that Bilgewater has some really, really strong tools to counter Zoe. And the first one that comes to mind is Hired Gun. They play Zoe on one, you play Hired Gun on two to grant Zoe vulnerability. And when they have two mana, they can't protect their Zoe from a 2/3 attacker. Unless they run Sunblessed Vigor, which isn't always an include in these decks. Just the ability of MF Sejuani to grant minions vulnerability makes it really hard for Zoe decks to stick their early minions to stall the game out. They're likely running cards like Zoe, Sparklefly, Eye of the Dragon, that when granted vulnerability, they have a much harder chance to survive. Even granting vulnerability to Lee Sin over the course of a couple of turns makes it really hard for Lee Sin to survive. And one card that really comes into play here is Razor Scale Hunter. If you're able to grant the opponent's Lee Sin vulnerable with this scout attacker on your defensive turn, you can open attack and threaten the Lee Sin with your scout. And if they have to play spells, waste mana to give Lee Sin barrier, and then you can play like your Sejuani down to kill the Lee Sin. So now Lee Sin's barrier is popped, they've already committed some mana, and they have a hard time defending Lee Sin against a second attack. And of course, we do have Sejuani. In this Lee Sin Zoe matchup, our Sejuani is able to level up and is really crucial that it does because in that late game, they have Lee Sin with Zenith Blade and you have leveled up Sejuani. If you're able to warning shot on their attack turn, you basically just completely deny their attack because Lee Sin now has zero attack and they can't really punch through. In addition, the nab package is able to disrupt some certain combo pieces from this deck. Um, while you are nabbing cards from the bottom of your deck, so it's not like, oh, you denied them their Zenith Blade draw top deck. Getting cards like Concussive Palm, Hush, Deny, can really disrupt their game plan, and even just taking copies of Zenith Blades makes their deep meditations a little bit worse as well. So there's a lot of decks in cards in their deck that actually counter their deck pretty well, which is a little bit funny to think about and why Nab is really good right now. So the next question you're probably thinking is, I know a deck that runs Misfortune and plays off of the Challenger vulnerability strategy. Wait a minute, that sounds a lot like Scouts with Grand Plaza. And you're kind of right. I think that Scouts Plaza and MF Sejuani will have similar spreads across the meta, but I think that MF Sejuani is a side grade to Scouts. MF Sejuani does not rely on drawing Grand Plaza to have some really explosive turns, and with the likes of Sejuani and the NAB package, we're able to have more late game value to sustain ourselves, either by stalling out the game with Sejuani in order to apply more favorable pressure, or having the NAB package to gain card advantage over your opponent. The other tool is that because, and this is something inherent to off meta decks, when you're playing an off meta deck, the opponent most likely has never played against you before and has no idea what's inside your deck and what cards to play around. This is a very powerful tool that's usually much more exploitative in tournaments, but also very well on ladder. When you play a card that your opponent doesn't expect you to be playing, they tend not to play around it. And so this leads us to very favorable outcomes when you know how to play against their deck, but they don't know how to play against yours. Now, the only downsides to MF Sejuani versus a deck like Scouts is that Scouts has a much higher power level and explosive nut draws. If they draw MF, Plaza, and Quinn, they're likely to blow out any game regardless of what the matchup is. And for those of you who did play this deck in the Rising Tides expansion, you know that the NAB package can be a little bit toxic to your opponent, especially if you steal one card that's the perfect counter to stop them from killing you that turn, and then you kill them on the following turn. It's a great way to ruin someone's day. And well, that could be a pro or a con if you're into that. But I'll leave that up to you guys. And so that's the main outline of the deck. I do have some really, really cool games to show you guys. I think that in this meta, because I'm targeting these two decks in particular, being Go Hard and Zoe Lee Sin, Zoe Lee Sin especially, because I think we are really favorable in this matchup. I have some really, really cool games to show you guys just how this off meta deck is able to counter two of the most popular decks on ladder right now. And even though this deck does do pretty well against the other spread of the decks on ladder right now, I do want to showcase these particular matchups because this is the main focus of why this deck is good in this meta. I'll leave you guys there. I hope you guys found this guide intuitive, enjoyable, and helpful. If you guys are planning on giving this deck a go in ladder, just let me know how it goes, and I'd love to hear your stories. But I'll leave it there, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you guys next. Hey guys, just a quick little side bit here. I did originally have live audio for these clips, but unfortunately there was a really bad echo on my end for my voice, and so I've had to cut all audio out completely. So apologies for that. But I will be commentating over these clips in the future, just so that you guys have some meaningful commentary to go along with these clips. But without further ado, let's just get started into our first matchup against Go Hard. So just a quick rundown against the general game plan that we want against Go Hard. We do want to have a very early aggression because we have a nice curve to counteract theirs. So that means that we want to kick cards like Black Market Merchant, and I think Sejuani and Razor Scale are a little too slow. We do want to make sure that we do hit our early curve. Crackshot Corsair is kind of interesting, but it just does really poorly against their one cost Jagged Butcher, and so I think it's correct to mulligan that away as well. This curve's looking alright. We did hit our 1-drop, but Black Market Merchant as a 2-drop doesn't feel so great. And he passes turn 1. There's no play for me to develop into. I would never play any of my plunder cards without being able to get value. And so Black Market Merchant, I never play into it just to push 2 extra damage. And he does have to go hard here, which would have punished me. So I have the option here. If he has a second go hard, I could save this 2 mana to play out Troll Chant to protect my Jagged Butcher, but I think Troll Chant's too important to be used to save 2 units at once, and so I think the right play here is to play Black Market Merchant, simply because I do have the Plunder this turn and nothing better to do. He did have the second go hard, and I still get a 2 at the end of it. One interesting thing about nabbing cards against a go hard matchup is that very critically, you can not only nab copies of Packer Bags, but you can also get important heal cards like Whale, sometimes Vile Feast, maybe even Doom Beast, to give yourself a little bit more buffer health. So when Ladros comes down and Packer Bags comes down, you can catch them off guard with a little bit of side healing that they normally don't expect. And this hired gun gives me a very good trade into this 2-2. I could open attack, either trade off either unit to play around a whale or a TF red card, or I could develop a little bit more into this attack. He obviously didn't have any early minions to play, and so it's likely that he has something like a Twisted Fate in hand. And so I think that he wouldn't be able to block with his Twisted Fate, so I think it's safe to develop Yordle Grifter into this attack. And we do get a copy of Go Hard, which actually isn't impactful in the slightest because Nab takes cards from the bottom of their deck, and so they would never have drawn into this copy of Go Hard before drawing into copies of Go Hard that are closer to the top of their deck. And so nabbing this Go Hard kind of sucks here, but it might affect the chances of like a Zap Sprayfin drawing Go Hard versus drawing a Glimpse. I'm not entirely sure how that works, but maybe that's kind of how it works. So he plays Twisted Fate out here just like I suspected, and we get to decide our attack here. I think that because I stole 1 whale, and he already has a Twisted Fate played out, I think it's safe to take this trade with the 2-3 here to leave it as a 2-1. And the only real punish is another Go Hard, for example. But now that he doesn't have mana, I do have access to a Troll Chant to keep them alive. His pickup card here does give him a lot of cards in hand, so this turn definitely I want to play a little bit more reactively to what's going on. He drops his Zap Sprayfin, and so he's tapped under a lot. My only real play here is Zap, so I think that's pretty straightforward what to do. And a second copy of Pilfered Goods. I don't quite know how many cards this TF has drawn. I think he drew 1 from blue, 4 from the turn, 1 from Zap, so he's at 6. So next turn he'll be at 7, and this is his third copy of Go Hard. So we could have took the turn to kill Twisted Fate instead with a whale plus Go Hard, but I don't think that's the right play here. We have the Sejuani to pick off the Twisted Fate on the next turn, but he could have like a salvage to level up his Twisted Fate. So I'm not exactly sure if the right play was to kill the Twisted Fate on the previous turn or not. I think it was likely that he could have also had another copy of Glimpse Beyond in his hands, and then it would have been a waste to attempt to kill the Twisted Fate. Well, we wouldn't even be able to kill it. So I think that on the safe play was just to develop Zap here. And now, very importantly to note is that he did play 3 copies of Go Hard already. So that means all of his copies of Go Hard in his deck are Pack Your Bags. And so if he doesn't play Pack Your Bags right here, I have the chance to steal them. And so he plays Zap to level up his Twisted Fate, which is ultimately fine. Um, and now, because there's a likelihood that he drew Pack Your Bags, I think that uh, I don't want to challenge this Twisted Fate uh, with my Sejuani, because if I lower Sejuani's health to 5, then he gets a pretty clean Pack Your Bags, and without needing to block it with his Zap Spray Fin. But he actually doesn't block Sejuani here with Zap, so I have the read that he didn't draw into a Pack Your Bags, because lowering Sejuani's health down would have allowed Pack Your Bags to clear here. And so this gives me an opportunity to play Pilfered Goods to have that chance to steal a Pack Your Bags from his deck. And I actually hit one, which is really good because we were able to develop a lot of pressure early on because he had a pretty poor early game. And now that he's at 11 health, we have this Pack Your Bags coming and the ability to, reset our board in case he plays his own pack to kind of go back at him. So he finally takes a glimpse here just to draw 3 more cards. And what's really cool is that not only did this Pack Your Bags that I played trigger Plunder for me to play Pilfered Goods again, because he has action here, if he decides to play Pack Your Bags, I can still play or I can still play Pilfered Goods to take a copy of Pack Your Bags before his Pack Your Bags turns all of his Pack Your Bags back into Go Hard. I know I used the word Pack Your Bags like 5 times in that phrase, but hopefully you're able to understand what I meant by that. And actually pull a second Pack Your Bags from his deck, which is absolutely devastating for our opponent here. I dealt 10 damage to him and I didn't even attack this turn. I do also have the warning shot at burst speed to kill him, so that if he decides to play another card here, he can't really play around it. And even if he does, he doesn't have the mana to play anything. Even his go hards are Pack Your Bags, so he doesn't even drain from them. And so he plays his second Burblefish, and I get the lethal with warning shot. So very good early aggression here into stealing 2 Pack Your Bags. So the next 2 games are against Zoe Lee decks, which I think that my deck is, or MF Sejuani decks are supposed to pretty hard counter in this meta. And the reason because is we do crucially have Hired Gun for a turn 1 Zoe. And so I see this Hired Gun, I'm very happy. We also have the ability to go pretty wide on board, which Lee decks do have a pretty hard time stopping. And this curve is just beautiful. We have 1, 2, 3 curve with Misfortune. And so there's a turn 1 Zoe, which is beautiful. I love it. I have first action on my turn 2. I instantly play Hired Gun, and he has no way to protect his Zoe unless he does play Sunblessed Vigor in his deck. And so it's only a matter of time before my opponent passes the turn over to me. Mwahaha, this is so diabolical. Not really, though. Any moment now. He's beginning to realize that the imminent danger against playing against a Bilgewater deck with a turn 1 Zoe. He's thinking about conceding right at this moment. He's looking at all the different timelines where I don't have a Hired Gun on turn 2 in hand. It's pretty much over for him. Not exactly. This matchup is still kind of hard, but I do think that we have quite favorable in this matchup. And bam, what does he do? Even if he Pale Cascades, that only puts his health up to 2, and Guiding Touch can't heal over its max health. So it's really down to Sunblessed Figure here. Either way, killing the first Zoe is really good, because if they don't have a second Zoe, they can't get a Zoe level up very easily. And that means that they can't stall out their games with like their Eye of Dragons granting all their units lifesteal or being able to push with over or elusive boards to kill you. And I do get this favorable trade here and pushing 2 damage while also being very ahead on board. So this is a very good spot for me to be in. But he actually did top deck a second Zoe, which is a little bit of annoyance, but hopefully we'll find the tools to kill it. And this Yordle Grifter and Twisted Fate draw really helped to flesh out my curve. Um, because he could still be on a Pale Cascade hand, this Mountain Goat could survive attack, and I don't want Mountain Goat getting more than 1 gem. So the right play here is to play Petty Officer to act as a blocker. And we actually do get an elusive blocker for Zoe, so even if he's on a Pale Cascade hand, um, then he can't get a star chart from Zoe's attack still. But now that he's tapped under Pale Cascade mana, we know that that's not a threat. He actually challenges a 3/1 instead of the elusive so that his Zoe could get an attack in. I'm not exactly sure if that was correct or not, but that's the play he went for. And I think Misfortune in this deck is still very powerful. It's much harder to level her up because the only scout unit we are running is Razor Scale Hunter, but it's still possible, especially in this matchup where he doesn't have very much interactivity with our side of the board, aside for Lee Sin itself. And now that we have Misfortune on board, we're not scared of a Pale Cascade putting this Mountain Goat over the 2 health threshold for our units to kill it. And so we always take the trade eventually because that Mount Goat is pretty much guaranteed to get 1 card off. And now this is a really, really important turn because I know that his Lee Sin can kill my MF, and I have no way of stopping that except if I Gold's card his Lee Sin. And the very, very important interaction here is I have Razor Scale Hunter and MF, well, soon to be on board. So if I grant Lee Sin vulnerability with my scout unit, I get to attack Lee Sin twice with MF on board, meaning MF's ability is able to destroy Lee Sin's barrier, rendering it kind of useless, and I get 2 attacks to kill Lee Sin. And so this Razor Scale Hunter MF combo is a little too strong to let MF die this turn. So this is where Twisted Fate really comes into play as a one-of, being able to provide a lot of flexibility and interactivity in key moments against this deck. And of course, he's definitely on a pale hand, but even if he pales here, all he does is trade away a 1/1 to draw a card, and he doesn't get a star chart off of this, so I block this every time. And of course, if he didn't have a pale, then like I just get really rewarded. And so this is where things really go well for me here, because now another very important thing while playing against Lee Sin decks is that if you're able to tap them out of all mana, then they have very little mana bank for the next turn to have many tools to interact. Because he didn't bank 2 spell mana earlier, he's down to 6 mana this turn, meaning that he has a very limited quantity of cards he can play here. Now he's down to 4 mana. The only card I'm worried about here is a Concussive Palm, but I think that if he doesn't play it here, he doesn't have it. And if he did Concussive Palm, I actually wouldn't be able to kill the Lee Sin this turn. So he still has decent amounts of counters against, this kind of play. We are threatening the Lee Sin here. If he does play a second spell to give Lee Sin barrier, his Lee Sin still goes down to a 4/1. And if he even so he has to play a spell here, usually costing 2 mana. If he has a second Guiding Touch in hand, Then his Lee Sin goes to a 4-3, and I still have ways to kill it fine. I need to be completely tapped out of that point. And so the things are looking good for me. I killed one Zoe already. This is the first Lee Sin I've killed, or I'm going to kill, hopefully. And if you kill all of their champions, this deck can't win. This deck is very reliant on their Lee Sin and their Zoe as their main win conditions. And if you kill their champions, they really have no other way to win the game. This scout attack also lets me drop Jagged Butcher as a 3/3 for this attack, which is pretty nice. So now he is at 2 mana, meaning that he could have a Pale Cascade. And so the question here is, do I attack with my Misfortune? And I think the answer is ultimately yes. If he decided to Pale Cascade, he could have saved his Lee Sin, which obviously would still die in the next attack. But I think that reads good enough to say that he doesn't have Pale Cascade to kill my Misfortune. And if he does block my Misfortune, I still get to push 3 damage or 2 damage because he didn't block another unit with it. So now that, yeah, I see the Sparkle Flag going to the 2/1 instead of like 3/3. So I think that's a pretty good read that he doesn't have Pale either. And so we're just waiting to see how he blocks. And this is great because obviously we pushed a lot of damage here. We're putting him on a very tight clock, and if he isn't able to kill us in the following turns, then obviously we're gonna win. And just check out this hand. This he somehow high rolls me again with drawing all of his champions, but we have the reload with his deck, and oh boy, do we draw the perfect card to stop him from playing the game. We have the perfect way to refill our hand by 4 cards, discounting them by 2 each. Well, and 1 for the first card that we draw. But this concussive palm is so huge because this saves our Misfortune, and if Misfortune died this turn, it would have leveled up when we attack next turn. And of course, everyone knows how powerful Misfortune is when she does level up, as evident by all the scout stacks on ladder. And of course, he's tapped under Deny mana, and so he has no way to kill my MF this turn. This is also particularly the specific matchup in which TF has the ability to level. Not only is Lee Sin their only real way to interact with our board, we also have a lot of ways to generate card draw, such as all of our NAB cards. And so he does his best to try to defend against this open attack, but because we've applied so much pressure early on and MF is flipping this attack, I think that there's no way for him to survive this attack. And even if he does, we have the ability to reload our hands by nabbing a lot of cards from his deck. And doing so, TF also levels, which means that we get red cards and gold cards to stall out the game even further. And he Vlads me. I think this is pretty GG. I don't think he has any way of stopping this. And I think that this is where the game ends. He takes his block. I'm still showing 5 from the units he's not blocking. And I get 3 from MF's ability. So even on board, we're representing 8 damage with a warning shot and a Yordle in hand, which is an extra 2 damage. And so he'd have to completely stop our attack here to even have a chance of surviving. And really crucially, because we killed the first Zoe, his Zoe level up here actually does nothing because we've already closed out the game. And I don't think there's any cards in that I've played that he can stop. He actually did stop the ability, but not being able to stop the attackers. And we have another additional 2 burst damage in hand. It just means that he loses to this attack. So really showcasing how powerful vulnerability can be against this matchup. And of course, a really crucial TF on turn 5 to stop his Lee Sin from killing my MF also allows me to apply a lot of pressure here. So up next, we do have our second matchup against Zoe Lee Sin. This matchup plays a little bit more differently than to the other game that I showed you guys. We're not able to pressure out our opponent as easily in this game, and you'll see how we have to take a different line of route in order to win this game. So again, we're looking for our early curve here, and we actually do find our 1, 2, 3, which is really good. Of course, hired gun on 2 for their Zoe on 1 is just really good at stopping any early uh, development from their side. And so it's just a matter of time whether or not we see that he does have his turn 1 Zoe, and we'll always develop out our curve as planned. So he does, and I'm really happy to have this hired gun. And of course, once it's our action on turn 2, we instantly play down the hired gun, and we can target out Zoe as the only target for this vulnerability. So now that he played Eye of the Dragon and tapped under 2 mana, it means that he can't Pale Cascade his Zoe the hired gun, and this allows us to pull in or to deal 1 additional damage with our attack. He could have chose to block with the Eye of the Dragon, but he ultimately didn't. He plays Mountain Gun on 3, and we play our MF. And so this is looking pretty okay. We have a decent board state advantage with MF on board. We are threatening that we to get this MF level up started, and so he takes a pass, and I'm pretty happy about this as well. Now we have another or another decision to make here, which is do we just take the open attack or the Zab Sprayfin? I think that there's very few cards in this deck that can punish an open attack. Uh, I mean, either he could play a unit that we'd have a poor block against, like another Eye of the Dragon, maybe. Um, but or he could play like a concussive palm, but I don't think that warrants enough to not develop this too elusive, especially because he can't block it. And of course, if he wants to waste a hush on my Zap Sprayfin, all the better for me. And so he is at 4 mana. The only risk is if he wants to pale his Eye of the Dragon to block my hired gun, he would get a pretty good trade here. Or he could have like a double pale hand that would protect his Mountain Goat. But I don't think that's something warranted to play around. And if he does take the, well, I guess the pale on the Eye of the Dragon is kind of risky attack with his hired gun. So maybe we should have just only attacked with the Zap Sprayfin. It's a little bit hard of a choice to make, but ultimately he didn't have it, and so we're not super punished by this play. So I actually got the Serpent here, which means that a Serpent with the gem that he got from the Mountain Goat, he has a way to kill our MF, which is a little bit scary because he did it so cheaply. And we could take this really YOLO make it rain to kill the Serpent and the Dragonling, but if he has like a Pale Cascade, then we kind of get blown out here because then we don't really have anything to do with our turn. And so I think that it's always right to just let this go through. And we can always play MF back down again if we need to. Now, I think I do make a misplay here by using the Razor Scale Hunter on his Eye of the Dragon. When he's on 5 mana, he could have dropped Lee Sin. And so if I had played Misfortune down instead, and then played my Razor Scale Hunter on the following turn after he dropped Lee Sin, this game outcome might be a lot different. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're playing through this deck. Obviously, I dropped the Razor Scale Hunter because I wanted to be a little bit more efficient with my unit mana, but ultimately I think that this was a misplay here, and being able to not only grant the Lee Sin vulnerability, but have a Scout and Misfortune on board to challenge it would be really devastating for him. And so, just a misplay here on my end. I was a little bit worried about the Eye of the Dragon just generating a lot of 2/1s to heal him out of my aggression. But ultimately, I should have just played the Misfortune on the last turn. And so I kind of made a misstep here. So he has the Lee Sin and the Zenith Blade, which makes this a lot scarier. And there's no reason to try to let him block with the Lee Sin because I don't think it's possible for me to kill it here. I think this is the turn we go for this Pilfer Goods. Um, just to see what we can get. Nopify and Mentor. So an alright selection of cards here. This Nopify would have been good for his Zenith Blade, but ultimately it's a little too late here. I don't think that Nopify has any more good hits. So Nopify is a little bit of a dead card here. Mentor's kind of interesting. The gems and the buff might help us out here, but it's a little bit hard to say. Funny thing is here that he spell thieves my pilfered goods because that was the only card I played this turn. And so he can actually pilfer goods me back here. So yep, he attacks the MF as usual. It's kind of strange that he lets Lee Sin take 3 damage here from this exchange. I think that Lee Sin's health is super important to sustain. And he could have probably easily played a second spell here to stop this. So I'm a little bit confused about his play here. And so this decision on what to do with our turn. Now that we have 0 spells, I think we want to be a little bit more efficient with our mana and play a 4 into a 3 rather than our 5 cost elusive. And the funny thing is that Pilfer Goods on my deck is nowhere near as influential as me pilfering goods his deck because I just run a lot of units, and I guess if he stole like a Riptide Rex, that could have an impact on the game, but he stole a Crackshot Corsair, which is very insignificant to say the least. This turn is pretty tricky because now that his Lee Sin's most likely going to level up next turn, I think that we're on a very tight clock, meaning that he could easily kill us next turn if we don't kill him this turn. Or, of course, remove the Lee Sin. So this turn's a little bit tough. I think this Nopify was wrong. I was thinking that I could pull off some elusive cheese with my Citrus Courier, but I think that tapping under Riptide Rex mana in an attempt to kill his Lee Sin was ultimately wrong. And so I've pretty much committed to the Citrus Courier line, and so it's just how can we best sustain a board that could possibly kill him in a turn or two. And I kind of have to go for no, I definitely buff the 2/2 elusive so that he doesn't get the block with Zoe. And I pretty much have to go in for a full attack here. This definitely would have been the right turn to play Riptide Rex, because after he chumps down these blocks, Riptide Rex could have a good chance of cleaning down the board. So this was a pretty tough spot. We could have also developed our elusive card here in hopes of dealing a few more damage, but I think that I was a little bit tunnel visioned onto this rally. So it's a little bit hard to say. He has a pale, which means he trades off my elusive, and this really shuts down my potential rally kill him game plan. So we're in a really tight spot here. The only saving grace here is that our Citrus Courier actually does heal us by 3. It heals the Nexus as well, which means that we have a little bit higher chance to survive next turn's attack from the Lee Sin. And I think the play is always Citrus Courier here. If we gemmed our Citrus Courier, we can maybe challenge the Lee Sin. But he does play the Zenith Blade on top of the Lee Sin to prevent that from happening. And the Citrus Courier is looking kind of dead. So now we just have to survive this attack and hope that there's some chance we can cheese him. Because he either kills us this turn or on his next attack turn. And this is a lot of damage, but we did draw our second Troll Chant here, which might be enough to cheese us out of this turn. I was thinking about if I could go for a YOLO Riptide Rex here, but I'm not exactly sure. I would have to pretty much land one on each of his units, and I don't trust my RNG enough to do that. And so I think the safe play here is actually to, with these two Troll Chants, I don't think he can kill us. And so I kind of bait him into attacking here, because he has lethal here. He has 1 plus 16. That Pale Cascade actually takes that to 20 damage from the Lee Sin alone. And so he's representing 20, 21 with the Lee Sin, 24, 25, 20. Wait, sorry. 21, 23, 24, 25. And these Troll Chants heal us by 4 each, meaning that if we double Troll Chant, we'll be alive at 25 minus 8 is 17 damage. We'd be alive at 2 health. And so if he has a second Pale Cascade this turn, we just lose, unfortunately. But because our Troll Chant lowers Lee Sin's attack to 6 and Citrus Courier's health to 7, we actually get Citrus Courier back here, which is really crucial because we do have this elusive 5-cost 4/4 with 3 gems. And if this Zoe wasn't here, we could threaten a 1-turn lethal by attacking with the elusive and rallying, if provided he doesn't have Hush in hand. And I think if he did have Hush in hand, he might consider hushing the Citrus Courier so it doesn't return to my hand, but I don't think that's a good play either. And so if we're not dead here, we actually have a very slim chance at coming out of this game alive. And so he actually left us through, meaning that we survive one more turn, and this is a turn that we have to kill him somehow. I don't know how we do it. Well, I take that back. I do know how we do it, but you guys won't. So we set up this elusive. I think that the Riptide Rex was too yellow here. Not being able to kill a Lee Sin doesn't really accomplish too much. And I think it's a little expensive with our mana here. I'm not sure. I think there's definitely moments we could have played Riptide Rex in this game, but I just chose not to. And wow, is that the king of top decks or what? I'll kind of explain why Sejuani is so crazy here. Sejuani not only allows me to challenge his Zoes so that my elusive unit can strike without being blocked, but if we don't kill him this turn, we do have the ability to level up Sejuani and have warning shot on the following turn to completely stop his attack, meaning that even if we don't kill him next turn, we have a chance that we also survive the following turn, which is absolutely crazy because of this Crackshot Corsair. And of course, me being able to pull in this Zoe, the Crackshot Corsair levels up the Sejuani, and then when Sejuani strikes, it board freezes everything. But that isn't really too relevant here. He could have hushed his Zoe, but I don't think that. And then he could have blocked my Sejuani with his Lee Sin, but or he could hush my elusive and kind of do the same thing here. But because I'm so close to threatening lethal, I do think I commit into these gems. And if he has no way to stop this attack, then I just win. And of course, if I don't win this round, I could stall out next round by playing Warning Shot into potential Rally or Rex in order to stall out that turn and then hopefully win on the following turn. There's not actually many ways he stops this turns from killing him. His only options are pretty much limited to a Pale Cascade that lives at 1, in which we have a warning shot. He could Concussive Palm or you could Hush. I think that's really the only options he has, but he has none of them, and we actually sneak this game out with a win. I don't think this game was played perfectly by any means, but I think that this kind of shows the flexibility of this deck and ability to kind of win even if our opponent draws all their champions.